Hi everyone. As you will have no doubt seen, June the 6th, just gone, 5 days ago, was the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, which was the great land assault in World War II that the Allies pushed on Normandy, on the Normandy beaches. Now, I grew up on stories of World War II. When I was a child, even before I went to school, I was infatuated by it. I read a hell of a lot about it, even before I went to school, and I used to have the Airfix models of the Spitfires and the Junkers and the Messerschmitts and all these other wonderful planes that were around during that time. I was amazed by them. I was infatuated by them when I was little, and I obviously knew a hell of a lot about World War II growing up, more than certainly the average person, especially with the propaganda that the media put on people during these times. And this is why I don't hold these commemorations, these anniversaries, in as much weight as the media do in this country, because I know how the media and the establishment will skew history and try and distort history to suit their own means. And this anniversary gone is no exception. It really isn't. This is from the Interregnum, which is Mohammed El-Matsi's own website. He's a friend of the show. Mohammed El-Matsi is. He writes for the Canary, independent journalist, writes for the Canary and Grey Zone, amongst others. This is his website. You should go and check it out. He's a great guy. Support independent media. You notice this. The royal family's official Twitter account deletes a controversial D-Day tweet that exposes disturbing historical revisionism of World War II. You can probably tell by the picture what's going to go on here. He said this: the royal family's Twitter account published a controversial tweet during the 75th D-Day commemorations. The ahistorical statement, which seemed to imply that the Germans were allies during the invasion, was deleted hours later. On the 5th of June, the British royal family's Twitter account posted a short video clip of the Queen shaking hands with different world leaders as part of the 75th D-Day commemorations. Less than 8 hours later, it was deleted. But why? Well, while the tweet was deleted, this author saved a picture of it beforehand, and a copy was also saved to the Wayback Archive. And you can see here, this is the tweet from the royal family. The Queen was introduced to leaders by the Prime Minister, each representing the allied nations that took part in D-Day. Well, they're allied now, I suppose, but during World War II they weren't allied. Germany were part of the Axis powers along with Italy and Japan. They were the enemy. It doesn't get much more revisionist than this, does it? Now, obviously, this could be construed as a mistake, but it does fit in with a bigger, broader complaint that people have over these sort of, these commemorations. He said here, Mohammed El-Matsi did, weren't the Germans on the opposite side? And where is Putin? Given that the Soviets did most of the fighting and most of the dying to defeat fascism, one would have expected a representative from the Russian Federation. Now, it is true, and this is something that I pointed out at the time, that Russia weren't actually involved directly in the D-Day landings themselves. However, they were involved in the preparations, and their Eastern Front that was launched 3 weeks after the D-Day landings, I think it was on about the 23rd, I'll get to that in a minute, that was actually launched in conjunction with the Allied nations, with the Americans, with Roosevelt, with Churchill. The three of them came together, and that was the plan all along. It was going to be a pincer movement from both sides. And while the British and the US were bogged down in the hedgerows of France, the Russians just made headway. They really did. And obviously, they got to Berlin first. They were the ones who died. It was something like 24 to 26 million Russians died in World War II. There's only about 65 million, it's about 65 million deaths during World War II. It's almost 40% of them were Russian. Only almost 1 million combined American and US died. It really is quite revisionist. Mohammed goes on to talk about this, and I want to obviously talk about this a little bit, just to give you some sort of historical history, just in case you weren't unaware of the sort of things that I was aware growing up, and why I can just point at things and go, no, that's not wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. He said it would be easy to see this as little more than an odd distortion of reality, an accidental mischaracterization of history during an official meeting of ruling class allies. But messages come out of official state representatives are incredibly calculated, and in this case, the entire situation, the presence of a German chancellor and the lack of any Russian officials, reflects a wider worldview that has been long in the making. One day later, Stephen Pfeiffer, a former US diplomat now with the Brookings Institute think tank, yes, that one, put out a rather telling tweet. And he's retweeting Rachel Piranha there, who said, you know, why wasn't Russia involved? And he said, let's see, why wasn't Putin involved to the D-Day commemoration? Is it because the Red Army played no part in the Normandy invasion? Or B, Russia today conducts low-intensity war against its neighbour, having made the biggest land grab in Europe, blah, 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 blah. You can see where that's going. Guy's an establishment asshole. John White responded, great, your poor knowledge of the history of D-Day is evident in Operation Bagration, which is the Eastern pincer movement, if you like, that the Russians did in conjunction with Operation Overlord. We worked with the Russians in World War II. If it wasn't for the Russians, we wouldn't have beat them. Even with America, some historians say, we wouldn't have beaten them. It really is important that future generations understand this. The Soviets were the impetus behind D-Day. He goes on to explain here, Mohammed Al-Matsi does. He says Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Stalin ultimately agreed to the US and UK committing to Operation Overlord after meeting in Tehran, Iran from the 28th of November to the 1st of December the year previous, 1943. It's important that people know this. As the US government's Office of the Historian put it, quote, the Soviets, who had long been pushing the Allies to open a second front, agreed to launch another major offensive on the Eastern Front that would divert German troops away from the Allied campaign in northern France. In other words, the D-Day invasions happened because of both pressure and support from the Soviet Union. Now, historians know this. People like me who've researched this growing up know this. It's fact. It's historical fact. Which is why it's so important we don't let the ruling elites bastardize history. And we certainly don't let the media echo whatever it is that they want put out there to indoctrinate the masses into believing, oh, Putin's bad and Russia were bad and they were bad all along. It's trying to make out that the Germans were allies, for Christ's sake, in World War II. He carries on here, and Mohammed quotes John McAvoy, who's another friend of the show, and who said in another article that according to the National World War II Museum, the Soviet Union suffered 24 military and civilian deaths during the war. The UK, meanwhile, suffered 450,000, and the US, like I say, less than 1 million between them. The German army invaded the Soviet Union, and the Red Army was ultimately the first to reach Berlin. Even Winston Churchill, a conservative with little esteem for the Soviet Union, claimed that it did, quote, the main work in tearing the guts out of the German army. There's John McAvoy. There's an actual journalist giving you the facts. Fantastic. Well done, John. Well done, Mohammed Al-Matsi, for this. But John actually went on again and took aim at statements made by the US president during the state dinner with the British royals, remember, just a couple of days before. This is what the White House tweeted out. This is their tweet. This evening, we thank God for the brave sons of the United Kingdom and the United States who defeated the Nazis and the Nazi regime and liberated millions from tyranny. The bond between our nations was forever sealed in that great crusade. Now, I know he was meeting the UK there, but come on. It's a little bit of a distorted view of history, isn't it? McAvoy argued that while the D-Day landings and liberation of Europe are events worthy of celebration, Trump's implication that, quote, it was the US and UK alone which defeated the Nazis and the Nazi regime is not consistent with the facts. You're damn right. He also critiqued the Queen's remarks. The Queen referenced to a hard-won peace. Meanwhile, overlooks decades of US and UK-sponsored post-war violence. Exactly. The Queen said, it's a hard-won peace. We've had 75 years of violence since, with America and us overthrowing governments left, right and centre and just ignoring human rights violations wherever we see fit. And then citing them when we actually want something done to increase our imperialism over the world, or the US's imperialism over the world. It plays into an imperial imagination, McAvoy continued, that once the Nazis were defeated, the problem of foreign aggression largely became a closed book. It didn't. It actually got far worse. Rewriting history in the servant of Western ruling classes, and this is really what I want to get to, and this is why I picked Mohammed al-Matsi's writing here to highlight. He says this: it is within the context that is now the deleted royal family's D-Day tweet that should be understood. Indeed, the fact that they deleted the tweet reveals that while many everyday observers remain oblivious to the implications of its message, those who are pushing those propagandizing narratives are doing so with their eyes fully open. Absolutely they are. In China, right now, there's a journalist who was arrested. Chris Hedges has been talking about this today, actually. There's a journalist that's been arrested in China because he's not been arrested. He was banned from WeChat, or whatever it's called, their equivalent of Twitter, because he was telling people Chinese people who were asking about Tiananmen Square, because it was an anniversary recent, the 30 years anniversary. They didn't know anything about it. And this journalist was actually talking to them, explaining. They were like, what were these people protesting at Tiananmen Square? They didn't know. And the person who was been informing them accurately of what happened at Tiananmen Square, he gets banned. This is what we're heading to right now in the West. We demonize Russia and China as this authoritarian regime, but we're doing it ourselves. That's almost what our aim is. It's almost like the government of the United States and United Kingdom look at Russia and China and think, yeah, that's the way we need to do it. Now, how can we do it without the people knowing? He closes his article on with this, Mohammed al-Matsi does. Decades of Western state propaganda against their own populations is literally erasing the memory of more than 24 million Soviet men, women and children who were martyred defeating Nazism, while replacing that history with an Anglo-American supremacist fantasy. A rewriting of history that is, perhaps ironically, worthy of Stalin himself. And that's what I mean. It's so true. This is what they're demonizing. They're demonizing Russia and China's way of life over here in the West and in the media. You know, that's what our establishment are doing. But all the while, that's exactly what they are trying to push us towards, and why we have to resist this. We have to. And we certainly have to resist them rewriting history in this way. Because otherwise, future generations, how can they learn from historical mistakes if history is just a warped view of what actually happened? And that's perhaps why I don't pay as much weight to these commemorations like the 75th anniversary of D-Day, however massive that was, and however grateful I am to all the brave people who fought in that war, not just on that day, but in that war. Something to think on. I want to do a little video just to, maybe explain a little bit of history to people who weren't necessarily aware of it beforehand. Hope it's gone down the right way. Thanks very much for watching. Please make sure you subscribe. Please make sure you click the bell below to get a notification of when I drop further videos, and click through to the website as well to find out ways you can support me. I can't do this without your support. I really do appreciate it. Till next time, peace and take care.